And what I'm trying to encourage you to say is like, yeah, those voices are out there, the voices of our parents, the voices of our wounds, the voices of society. Great. There's also the voice of the shepherd. Who are you going to listen to today? The voice of love or the voice of condemnation? The voice of grace or the voice of judgment? The voice of you are enough or the voice of you are not enough? I'm telling you, friends, like this is so impactful on how we show up in the world, how we live out our faith every day. And so your thoughts, the messages, the ideas, what's going on inside of your mind this morning? What's going on inside of your heart? What's been repeating over and over again? I brought a relic with me this morning. It's a record. I know some of you don't even know what this is, but there it is, a beautiful black record. It's a Christmas. I told my wife, Jennifer, I said, hey, Jen, we got some records, right? She said, oh, yeah, they're up in the attic. I'm like, can you get a record? I want to use it as a prop at CRB. And so she got this record, the Firestone Your Christmas Favorites record. Who knew that Firestone, the tire company, used to put out Christmas records? But here we are. But if you know anything about records, by the way, do you remember the very first record that you got? Some of you, again, too young for records, but for us old folk in the room, my first record was Devo. And I used to play Whip It, like just on nonstop. You know, I'd pick up that needle, I'd play it again. I'd pick up the needle, I'd play it again. I mean, the hats, the whole thing, right? That was my first record. But one of the things about records that we know is that when a record gets scratched, the needle gets stuck, right? So I may be trying to listen to Whip It, but if there's a scratch on that record, it's just going to get stuck, and it's going to play the same line over and over again. It's going to play the same thing, like, right? You know, for this, if you may be listening to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer for a very long time, if there's a scratch on this record. And I think that happens a lot with our thoughts in our lives. Like there's some trauma, there's some wounding, there's something that happens to you. There's a really painful divorce. There's an addiction. There's something that happens on your record and it gets scratched. And all of a sudden you get stuck. And you're stuck on that message. And God's saying, hey, there's more to this album. There's a lot more songs that I would love for you to hear, but we're stuck here. So let me ask you this morning, who scratched your record? Or what scratched your record? Are you playing all the songs? Or are you just kind of stuck with a particular message, a particular tune, a particular lyric that gets played over and over and over again, and you don't know how to get out of it? You don't know what to do about it? You're just like, my record is scratched. Help me. Help me. Well, the good thing is that there's a story about this in the Bible where Jesus has an interaction with one of his disciples whose record got scratched. And he got stuck. And it's the story of Peter denying Christ 3 times. And it's probably a familiar story. It's a story that you probably have heard before. But here we are at the Last Supper, and Jesus says this. They're kind of all the disciples are gathered, and Jesus is predicting his death. And Peter says this. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. Wow, can you imagine hearing that? But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. So here Peter makes like pretty bold statement in front of Jesus and in front of the other disciples. And it's like, hey, that's crazy talk, Jesus, that I would deny you. I am the rock that you're building the church on. I'm your most loyal disciple. Deny you? You mean everything to me, Jesus. Jesus said, this is what's going to happen. And guess what? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. The thing that Peter emphatically said, I would not do, he does. And the Bible says this, says that Peter wept bitterly after he had denied Christ. Can you imagine just waking up the next morning going, I cannot believe I did that. And you talk about a record getting scratched and a needle getting stuck. Man, how many times is Peter going to replay that night over and over and over again? And none of the other stuff really matters at that point, does it? Like not all the great work that Peter had done with Jesus or the things that Jesus declared over Peter, that he was the rock and all the good that Jesus called out in Peter, none of that really, really mattered at this moment because of what happened last night. I don't know if you can relate to that, but my guess is you probably have a scratch or 2 on your record, and it's like you go back to that moment. You go back to that failure. You go back to that betrayal, that relationship. You go back to that divorce. You go back to that thing that brings you shame and you're embarrassed about, and the record's just stuck there. But good news, guys. Jesus has a plan for this. And we pick it up. Jesus is now risen, and he is on the beach, and it's morning, and the disciples have been out fishing. Peter out there, not catching a lot of fish. And then Jesus sits down with Peter, and they have breakfast. And they start having this conversation, and Jesus knows exactly what's going on here. Peter must be a broken man at this point. Feels like a fraud. I'm sure he's embarrassed to stand there. He knows what he's done. Jesus knows what he's done. The record's been scratched. We pick it up here. It says, the 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? You see, Jesus asks Peter, he says, do you love me? And he asks him 3 times. That's no coincidence, right? 3 times, do you love me? Jesus just reaffirming the truth here. He's just reaffirming who Peter is. And like, Peter, listen, I get it, you screwed it up, but do you love me? Of course you love me. And it says Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him for the 3rd time, but Jesus is being intentional. He says, listen, we got a big old scratch on this record and we got to do something about it. So I need to make sure I get through to you on this one. 3 times, I'm going to make sure that we're clear on who we are and what's going on here. And he says, do you love me? And Peter said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus then said to Peter, go feed my sheep. Here's my translation of that. Go raise your voice. Don't get stuck here. Don't get stuck with the denials. Don't get stuck with that night where you denied even knowing me. He says, I know you love me and you know I love you. Now let's go. Go feed my sheep.